Hi, this is Eloy Ortiz Oakley, and welcome back to the Rant Podcast, the podcast where we pull back the curtain and break down the people, the policies, and the politics of our higher education system. In this episode, I get to sit down with Sophie Nguyen. Sophie is a senior policy manager at New America, and she heads the public opinion portfolio for the organization. Sophie led the surveying of Americans and how they're feeling about higher education. And the title of the survey is called Varying Degrees 2025. The latest survey is available on their website at newamerica.org. I'll sit down with Sophie and talk to her about what are the themes that she sees coming out of the 2025 survey, how they compare to previous surveys, and her thoughts about why Americans are feeling a level of frustration with higher education today. The Varying Degrees 2025 survey falls in line with many surveys that I've seen recently. As a matter of fact, my organization, College Futures, recently partnered with Gallup here in California to survey working age adults. And much of the same issues that we saw come up in the Varying Degrees survey, we see coming up in the Gallup survey here in California, as well as Gallup surveys from across the country. Americans are feeling a sense of frustration. At the same time, they're still telling us that they believe that a post-secondary pathway, a quality post-secondary pathway, is still a ticket to the American dream, or here in California, to the California dream. So what's the disconnect? People still feel that higher education provides value, particularly for themselves, for their children, for their communities. But at the same time, they're expressing deep frustration with the way higher education is serving them these days, with the cost of higher education. Over and over again, we see costs coming up as one of the greatest sources of frustration, both in terms of the upfront cost and the amount of debt that learners have to take on. And it's also one of the greatest barriers to entry and one of the greatest reasons that learners stop out of their college experience. Another frustration that we heard come up here in California, as well as you'll see across the nation, is the frustration with the way higher education serves working age adults. Higher education is not designed for them. I think back on my own experience coming out of the United States Army back in 1988. Having a daughter, having to raise a family, having to find work, not having any of the skills that I obtained in the United States Army transferred to any sort of education. I worked for several years before I entered college. And fortunately, I found a community college. I then transferred to the University of California, Irvine. But you know what? Much of the way that we offer higher education back in the early 90s, when I went to college, especially for working age adults, works pretty much the same way today. Not much has changed. Fortunately, today, there are other options. I recently interviewed Greg Fowler from UMGC. UMGC is doing a great job of meeting working learners where they're at. I wish I would have had an option like that back in 1988. And we also have examples like Western Governors University, ASU, Southern New Hampshire. But by and large, traditional higher education has not changed a bit. And we're living it in a point in time where if institutions do not change, they're going to become less and less relevant because access to information, access to skill acquisition, access to learning is becoming much easier to get to. And so back to the example of California, College Futures, we've been looking deeply at what's going on with working learners. As a matter of fact, we launched a $4 million funding opportunity to be able to build a new set of partners and look at a new set of ideas on how California can better serve working learners, how it can reimagine its higher education system to design with the working learner in mind. This is no longer an issue of it'd be nice to have. This is an issue of must have for states like California and for all 50 states. We're at a point in time where the impacts of the workforce, the impacts of AI on the workforce, the new economy that's being created, are going to put learners further and further behind if they don't have access to quality post-secondary pathways. So this isn't just an issue for those individuals who are at the lowest rungs of wages or who have had no access to higher education, some access to higher education but no credential, or even those who have had access to higher education and have a credential. Every worker, every adult learner is going to need to be able to upskill and reskill multiple times during their career. If a state like California wants to continue to be competitive, wants to continue to be the fourth largest economy, wants to be an inclusive economy for all Californians, then it must take this moment to reimagine its post-secondary systems with urgency. So I hope that in my conversation with Sophie, you'll pick up on some of the frustrations Americans are telling us. And I hope that we as a higher education community finally take this serious. Look at the examples of the UMGCs and WGUs and rethink how we organize ourselves and design for the working learner. That doesn't mean that all education needs to be online or competency-based. We have to create multiple pathways. But these are no longer the outliers. These are no longer, the weirdos in the class. These are examples of quality higher education happening at scale. And so institutions like we have here in California, whether it be the California Community Colleges, the California State University System, and even the University of California, need to begin to reimagine how they deliver their education and do it with urgency. We don't have much more time, folks. Americans continue to lose faith in the higher education system, particularly the traditional higher education system, and we must do more to meet learners where they're at. We need to create more opportunities in more places for more learners. So with that backdrop, please enjoy my conversation with Sophie Nguyen from New America. Sophie, welcome to the Rant Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us, and specifically to talk about the latest survey of Americans and how they're feeling about higher education. It's called Varying Degrees, and we'll jump into it. I'm anxious to find out what you're seeing in the data, what you're seeing in the surveys. But before we get into the survey, tell us about your work at New America and what your higher education journey was all about.
Thanks for that question. I'm the Senior Policy Manager with the higher ed team at New America. So currently, I manage our public opinion portfolio and also work on a variety of issues related to college completions and student support. I've been at New America for actually 8 years now. This is where I started right after college. So it's technically the only place I have work in my professional career. I work on a variety of issues since I've been here, and now public opinion is something that I been dedicating a lot of my time with. And how did it start my higher ed journey? I would say let's start with college. Actually, I think when we were asked what made me decided to do higher ed policy, the thing my first answers to them would be because I love college. I went to a very small private liberal arts college in Massachusetts, Mount Holyoke College. I think it was a life-changing experience for me, being in a space with a lot of like-minded women, but also really receive a lot of support from professors and also staff at school. And at the time when I was still trying to figure out what I want to do, what do I want to become. It was just I would say a transformative experience for me. And that's when I came across New America was hiring an intern for their higher ed policy then. And that's when I came across that opportunity. And applied. And long story short, I got the internship and I'm still here after 8 years.
Well, let's talk about higher ed. So, and specifically, let's talk about the Varying Degrees survey. So New America does this survey it's about every year. I've been doing it for some time.
Yeah.
And you're specifically looking at how Americans feel about higher education. And I think this is top of mind for many of us in higher education these days. There's been a lot of challenges, a lot of political attacks, a lot of a lack of trust in institutions, an erosion of confidence in the value of higher education. I know in my organization, College Futures, we recently did a survey along with Gallup and find people still see value in higher education, but are questioning how they receive it, who receives it, who doesn't, and the cost of higher education. So let's jump into the most recent survey, and I'll start by reading the opening couple of sentences just to sort of lay the foundation here. It says, higher education is under intensifying political and public scrutiny. I certainly agree with that. Facing challenges like federal funding freezes and overhauls to student aid programs, yet despite deep divides in policymaking, New America's Varying Degrees 2025 survey reveals that Americans remain united in their beliefs about the purpose and the value of higher education. So let's jump into that. Let's start just by telling our listeners about the survey, who you surveyed, and how long you've been doing this.
So Varying Degrees, we survey of Americans' perspective of higher education. We have conducted the surveys since 2017. It's been, this year is the 9th year that we have conducted the surveys. So we have 9 years of data on how Americans feel about higher education. The issues that we mostly focus on in the surveys are about value, like whether people think college is worth it, how they feel about the way higher education is going. And then we ask questions about fundings, whether it should be the students or it should come from like the government, whether it's the federal or state government. And we also ask questions about accountability, like in terms of like outcomes that students should expect to get from college, and also what to do when, like how to hold, like whether people think colleges should be held accountable if like their programs doesn't lead students to the outcome that they promised. Sometimes we add new questions just to capture the moment, like our opinion of the moment, like on the huge topic of the moment. But yeah, like there's a set of questions that we ask year over years. And I would say that like come back to the opening line that you just mentioned about, like that you read from the survey about the purpose and the value of higher ed. Like what you said, there has been a lot of challenges. This year has been, I would say, since I started working in this space and learning all sort of things about higher ed, since 2017, no year has been I would say maybe a normal year. Like colleges went to COVID, like just like 5 years ago. A lot of, I would say, fundamental changes in the way that people learn and receive support from colleges into this moment where we are now. The whole sector is feeling the impact of it. Like the thing that we find in the survey is that, yes, there has been a lot of, like we're living in a moment there when it's feel like there's hardly anything that Democrat and Republican can agree with. What we find in our survey that, yeah, like on a lot of issues, like there's still like gaps between Republicans and Democrats, but it doesn't mean that they disagree on everything. There's like questions about the purpose of college, what they should do for students and family and society. Like we find a lot of alignment.
Right. So let's talk about what you found. Americans are saying a lot of different things about higher education these days in the various surveys that I've seen. So what did you pick up in the survey? What are some of the common themes that people are saying about the purpose of higher education and the value?
First thing first, I would say we find in the surveys that a majority of Americans still believe that higher ed is worth the investment, and that they would still want their children to have some sort of education after high school, whether it is a certificate program, an associate degree, or a bachelor degree. It just doesn't have to be a 4-year degree. And when it comes to questions about like the purpose and the missions of higher education, like we have like more than 90% of Americans believe that, like job training is extremely important, and they expect that colleges and universities equip students with the skill and the knowledge that they need to prepare them for the jobs they're going to take after college. But job training is not the only important goal of college. Like when we ask about like whether people think it's important that college prepare students to be a critical thinker or like an informed citizen, or prepare students with like other like skill sets such as communication and writing. It's very important for college to equip students with skill and knowledge that they need to be successful in their job after college. But at the same time, we also see that job training is not the only outcome that Americans or the public would expect from college. When we ask about like whether it's important for college to prepare students to become like informed citizens or critical thinkers, we have like a range of like around like 80 to 90 to more than 90% of Americans believe that these are like important skills that college should equip students with. And we see strong alignment between Democrat and Republicans.
So in your survey, tell us about who you surveyed. How many people did you survey? And it sounds like you broke it down. You were able to get information on whether they're Democrats, Republicans. Were there also some independents in there as well?
That's right. So we surveyed American adults, so those 18 years and above. The sample size for the 2025 survey is around 1,600, a little bit more than 1,600. And our samples can be broken down by 13 different demographics, not just political affiliations, but also like race and ethnicity, income level, educational attainment, or like even like student status or veteran status. Look at the difference among other demographic group, not just political affiliation.
Great. And so as our listeners are listening or watching this interview and they want to go pull down the report, I imagine they can just go to newamerica.org and click on the latest varying degrees 2025 survey, correct?
Exactly.
Okay, great. So you've talked about the fact that you've done this report for several years. Are there any major shifts in opinion that you saw from the previous years to this year, or is it been a sort of a steady state of opinion going forward?
First of all, I would say public opinion usually don't change a lot. Before anyone who do this work, people don't change their mind that often. And that's something we find with our survey as well. Even like I would say during the past 9 years that we conducted the survey, there has been a lot of fundamental shifts in higher education. Like I thought would maybe like significant change people respond, but actually when we look at respond from years over years, especially for questions that we have asked, like for example, since 2017 or 2019, like the very beginning of the survey, the response are pretty stable, especially like on those questions to provide students with the return on investment or whether people think that college is fine the way it is. There's some fluctuations year over year, but across the board, we see numbers still pretty much remain stable. Having said that, on the questions around like whether people think that college is the what's the return on investment, for example, we notice a slight declining trend. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, from like 2019 when we asked that questions for the first time to now it's still like 70, like around 70% of people still think that yes, college is worth the return on investment. But compared to like when we asked the question for the first time in 2017, it was like 78%. Like now it was like in 2025, it's like 74%. Yes, people still, a majority still believe in the value of college, but there's obviously some frustration there.
I agree that it's a trend that we should be paying attention to because it's a trend that shows up in many surveys of Americans. Recent work that we did with Gallup or recent surveys that I have looked at over the years tend to center around frustration about cost and frustration that their degree or credential hasn't led to the kind of economic outcome that they were anticipating. Do you find similar themes in your survey?
Yeah, I would say in our survey, cost still come up as some of the top concerns as to why people are like not feeling happy about higher ed. Like affordability is definitely a key issue.
Right.
People would like cost is still like people believe that to be like the number one reason why someone stopped out or like no, I decide not to go to college. When you conduct surveys, it's honestly actually very reassuring to see like other surveys show the same show the same results. So that like obviously we're confident with our methodology, but also like it's actually helpful to see other surveys actually confirm what you find as well. It just like come back to the point that none of these issues is new and has been around for a long time. And for it to show up over and over again in multiple surveys across the year and for not a lot of changes to happen to counter that directly, I think it's just add to another reason as like that explain why confidence for higher ed is just being low right now. And yeah, it's just add to the frustration, like to just public frustrations.
Right. No, I agree. And I'm glad that you made the point that this is not something new. This is certainly something I've been seeing in the water for almost the last decade. More and more frustration, more and more people who are not served well by higher education, the cost of higher education continuing to go up, the cost of financing, the amount of debt that you have to take on. So all these things have sort of led to this moment. And, you all continue to capture this sentiment in the American psyche. Now, let me ask you one last question as we begin to wrap up. Given that you're sitting there receiving this public opinion and your background now in higher education policy and spending time at New America thinking about these challenges, based on what you've seen in the survey, what advice would Sophie have for policymakers or for higher education leaders who want to continue to improve how the public thinks about higher education? What would be your advice to them?
I mean, first of all, there gotta be some definitely significant change to directly answers, address these concerns about cost, about job outcomes, about like support, issues around student support to help students get to the finish line. They definitely need to have action taken from like not just from the policy side, but also from the institution side. At the same time, I would say policy change. As we know, federal policy will take time to happen. The current policy environment that we're in today, there will be a lot of challenges to see actions that would directly address like affordability happen. But I think there's also other like actions that institutions can take that will have are likely have more immediate outcome. They need to be able to tell a better story about themselves, why they matters, what they're doing. I think there has been a huge disconnections between college and the public. Part of the reason is also like we have 6,000 institutions in the US. A lot of them are open access, but a very small subset of them that are very exclusive and high ranking themselves are those institutions that the public mostly hear about in the media.
Right.
Like whenever there's a New York Times piece come out or Wall Street Journal piece, it's not about the community college that is in that town, but it's always about the Harvard, the Columbia,
Right.
or like some like flagship like University of Virginia, like University of, I don't know, it's just like a state flagship. And even though those institutions don't represent higher ed, it feels like they do. And that's a huge problem because like a lot of the values and the missions that those institutions represent does like portray themselves doesn't connect with everyday Americans. When everyone just wants to find an options that accessible to them, what they see is like just the elite colleges with like very, very high tuition fee being featured over and over again. It's not just about like job training, right? It's also about like research and development and innovations, and a lot of the things that they do can benefit the society at large. And they need to be able to build a stronger message to create a more impactful narrative for higher educations that make them feel relevant to just day-to-day American.
Well, I think that's great advice, Sophie. And I really appreciate you taking the time to join us here on the Rant Podcast to talk about the New America Varying Degrees 2025 survey. Thanks for your work and thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. It has been a pleasure.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you, Sophie. So thanks for joining us, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed my conversation with Sophie Nguyen, the Senior Policy Manager at New America. She was talking about the latest Varying Degrees survey that New America released, the Varying Degrees 2025 survey. You can access the survey and the data at the New America website at newamerica.org. I'll put a link to the report in the notes section of this podcast. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit subscribe, continue to follow us. And if you're listening to us on audio, continue to follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Thanks for joining us, everybody, and we will see you all again soon.